Bleh. You know, I love these two bands, the Misfits and Sublime, and they have a lot in common with each other, or they have some stuff in common with each other. They both have this incredible, and the reason why I'm bringing up the Misfits in a show that really shouldn't be about Misfits is because, you know, the histories kind of run parallel in certain ways. You have you have two bands with just this great artistic sense, this great visual aspect to their music. The places where they come from have become like historic footnotes. You know, Long Beach, California is to Sublime in the way that Lodi, New Jersey is to the Misfits. You know, they both were around for a finite period of time. The Misfits were around for about 7 years. And, you know, they say Sublime started in 86, but really, I don't know. From what I've read and studied and learned about this band, I mean, they really started in 88. That's when the band really comes together. So they both were roughly around for the same period of time. They also hold one more distinction that's noteworthy in that they both have secondary iterations of the band that divide fans, where, you know, the fans are split. There are some fans that are super stoked that the band is back. I say that in quotation marks if you're listening to this on the podcast via Spotify. The band is back and they're out playing shows and they're keeping the music alive, versus the purists who are like, no, the band was this thing, and when this thing left the band no longer existed. Which then brings me to, you know, the rules. And what are these rules? There's no actual rules, but it's like kind of like it's a philosophy, right? It's like a sort of an understanding of like what makes a band. And I think like what gives a band an identity that they go by the name of that band. And when does that change? At what point do things within that band alter in a way where you no longer can go by that name? In the case of the Misfits, Glenn Danzig left the band that he fronted, and Jerry and Doyle continued on without him and got a new singer. And most people would tell you, myself included, they never should have called themselves the Misfits. It's not really the Misfits. You need Glenn Danzig and Jerry only for it to be the Misfits. And by the same token, the heart and soul of Sublime was Bradley Nowell. You know, what contributions did Eric Wilson and Bud Gaugh have to Sublime? I don't know Sublime as well as I know the Misfits and their history and their inner workings. I've interviewed a lot of the former members of the Misfits and people in the periphery, and really just, you know, really people have called me an amateur historian of the Misfits. And I think it's an appropriate title. I really do feel like a historian. I really do feel like I've studied the history of that band and know them inside and out as well as one can as a fan in the age of the internet and the age of talking to people and interviewing people. I can't say the same for Sublime, but I've read a lot about Sublime, and but I don't know to what extent Eric Wilson and Bud Gaugh were the creative driving force in Sublime. I know Eric Wilson most certainly contributed writings. I'm pretty sure it was Eric who came up with his own bass parts. And I'm pretty sure Bud Gaugh came up with his own drum parts. I'm pretty sure that those guys jammed out those songs until those songs became those songs. And that's how that band kind of functioned. Even if Brad, you know, again, Brad's bringing all these different influences, bringing all these songs and incorporating, like doing these half original, half cover songs. Essentially, is what they are. And the mentality comes from, you know, a mentality that they have in Jamaica, with Jamaican and Caribbean music, dance hall and reggae and all these things, this idea of this thing that I'm going to sound like such a white boy with what I'm about to say. What's up, crazy white boy? Speaking of white boys, crazy white boys saying, wow, I didn't think they could use the name. This idea of deridum. It's called deridum, and it's a colloquialism for rhythms, different rhythms, in the same way that with hip hop, you can have people can get a beat, you get a beat, and you riff, you freestyle your own thing over that beat. You know what I'm saying? And it could be the same beat. And I feel like that's what that's the super unique, interesting thing that Brad brought musically, where, hey, what's up, Aaron? How are you? Where Brad is going like, I'm going to do, every day I love it just a little bit more. Like he's like doing a little Barrington Levy. And then it turns into his own song. And then he goes back into the Barrington Levy song. He did that. I mean, if you look at the songwriting credits on all these Sublime songs, you will see that there's partial songwriting credit from so many people, because that's they borrowed. That's what, the idea of the boss DJ. We're DJs. We're picking up things that we like, and we're imprinting ourselves onto these things that we like and repackaging it through our own arrangements and our own style, our own style-y, as they say out in the West Coast, and doing this thing, bringing our own flavor into it. You know what I mean? And that primarily is Brad, right? Bradley Nowell, who is the frontman, guitar player, lead singer, pretty much soul singer of the band. Now, the reason why I'm bringing that up is because, to go back again, we were talking about rules, criteria. What are the rules and criteria for what make a band a band? You have frontman, you have founding member, you have singer-songwriter or just songwriter, and you have, I don't know, creative director, maybe. These are all elements that make a band by the given band name. Now, there's no there's no concrete. If your lead singer leaves, that doesn't mean you have to stop being said band. If one of your songwriters leaves, that doesn't necessarily have to mean that you have to being that band. It's very subjective. A lot of questions come up. How many songwriters are in the band? Who founded the band? Did the founding member, who's also the singer-songwriter, leave? You can't call that band the band anymore. That's not the band anymore. Glenn Danzig founded the Misfits, brought Jerry in, and they became the Misfits together with Manny. That was the core, the founding of the Misfits. Glenn wrote all the lyrics. Glenn wrote just about all the music, or most of the music. And Glenn leaves. You can't call that the Misfits anymore. You have to call it another name. And by the same token, if your singer, songwriter, frontman, vocalist, founding member dies of a heroin overdose tragically, you can't call yourself Sublime anymore. You can't do it. There are all these bands that are trying, and that's the other thing that I forgot to mention about running parallel between the Misfits and Sublime. The Misfits, essentially, Glenn Danzig with the Misfits, Jerry Only, a whole genre of music, horror punk, basically sprang from this one band. This one band created a whole subgenre, a whole subculture, and a whole scene, a whole thing, a whole aesthetic just from their band. And the same exact thing happened with Sublime out in California. You had all sorts of cookie cutter copycat bands. Pepper was one of them, I remember. You just have all these bands just trying to friggin' package that very original / derivative, because as we described what those guys would do with other people's songs, this very unique thing that Sublime did. Then everybody started trying to copy it, because this crazy thing happened. And in the way that, again, another parallel, here's this underground thing, Misfits, underground, and all of a sudden Metallica starts wearing Misfit shirts, and their exposure just explodes. They're still a cult band. They're still an underground thing, but they're suddenly introduced to all these metalheads are suddenly introduced to this concept that is the Misfits. For Sublime, they end their first official studio album, like in a proper studio, having signed a record deal for which they were in $1 million of debt for, goes platinum 6 times. They break out, they burst out. They basically they don't do what Dookie did, and they don't quite do what Nirvana did on that level, on that scale, but they explode. This very underground sort of thing explodes onto the mainstream, and suddenly everybody knows the song Santeria, and everybody knows all their music, What I Got, everything. It just becomes so, and of course it gets adopted by a lot of terrible, you got college frat, culture, just like all this, some of the worst people. So this Sublime, it's just so bad. It's hard to be a Sublime fan sometimes. It really is. It really, really is. You know what I'm saying? I want to slightly stupid. I want to give them kind of a pass in the sense that you could say that they ripped off Sublime, but like, man, those kids were 15 and 16 and they knew Brad, and their first album as 15 and 16-year-olds were on Skunk Records, right? Like that, Brad played on one of their songs. Like they knew, Brad was like their mentor. I do not hold that against them. I don't think of them as like totally derivative. Like maybe they're derivative of Sublime, but like, again, it's like those dudes were heavily influenced in a kind of a really valid sort of way, in my opinion, comparatively speaking to some other ones, So I can't really, fault them for that. I'm not going to. There are bands out there like Badfish, who I've seen many times. Badfish, I used to be on their street team. In fact, when I was in college, Badfish is one of the best Sublime cover bands, endorsed by Bud Gaugh as well, drummer of Sublime. It's like Bud and Eric are like shit. Here's a cover band making over $1.5 million annually touring on our music. Why can't we do that? And, obviously, like again, with the Misfits, like with any of these situations, why do people continue after the element that makes them what they are is gone? Why do they continue? They continue because it's easier to continue with an established brand that's going to command a higher guarantee and more money and get you a record deal and get your foot through the door than it is to start from scratch. And those guys gave it good, hard college tries. They did. They did so many things before they decided to reform as Sublime. The Misfits, had they decided to not use the name, could have called themselves The Resurrected. They could have called themselves Dead King's Rise. They toyed with the idea of calling themselves Them, which, by the way, them is THE and then M, which is where you would search for them in a record store if you were looking for the Misfits. Get it? Them, the Misfits. So, that would have worked. Just them Misfits. It completes itself. How do you find a way to be the thing? In the case of Sublime with Rome, I've always said to myself, what's a good band name for Sublime with Rome? Secondhand Smoke. They should have gone out as Secondhand Smoke. They could have gone and called themselves Secondhand Smoke. It's just this name, because what is ultimately, when you name something, when you give something the same name as something else, and it's not the same thing, you invite comparison. And that's what all these bands do. That's what Jerry Only did. That's what Eric Wilson has done. Funny how it's the bass players. Another parallel there.